Interview with Isabel Masland at her office in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania on June 18, 2002 with Jen Elliott as a part of the Cumberland County Women During World War II Oral History Project. All right. Can you tell us a little about what your life was like before the war?
Before the war, actually I lived in Harrisburg, had a very carefree life as a little child, and right before Pearl Harbor, about 6 months before, we moved to Carlisle to 2 Mile House. So I was a stranger in town, and I wasn't really in town, I was out in the country. And I had an older sister, much older, who was off in college by this time. So let's say I moved to Carlisle, out in the country there with no friends, nothing. And it was a very different existence from living in the city of Harrisburg, where I'd been, where I had friends, all around the block and a gang I played with and all that, to suddenly being transplanted out in the country. And then the war years were very different. You were no longer a child the minute war hit.
Where were you when you heard about the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
I was in the living room at 2 Mile House, and we had a radio, of course no television, and I can remember us all just sitting there glued to it, and I think I realized that it was pretty serious. I was probably 13 at the time, and it did change our lives.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you react to the news?
I don't think at 13 I reacted much one way or the other. It was kind of a wait and see.
How did your community respond? Did they take like an active role right into...
I wouldn't know, because we weren't
true.
part of the community at that point.
That's true. I'm sorry. How did the war affect you and your family's daily life with things such as like rationing, victory gardens? Did you participate in that?
We definitely participated. At the time, I was at 2 Mile House with my mother and father, and my mother was not particularly well. My father was an engineer, and quite quickly, he wasn't drafted, but he was commandeered to build army camps. So he was sent away a lot. He worked in Harrisburg, so we did have a more gas allocation than many families. So gas wasn't too much of a problem. I know it was for other people. We planted a huge victory garden, and I learned very quickly how to garden, and I really thought it was quite a burden. To be out weeding every day. I mean, our garden was the size of a normal house plot, I guess, in the city. And we got 5 sheep, and we would butcher meat like once a year. I mean, all this was new to me. The meat rationing was kind of a jolt, because we definitely did not have meat every day, and I just assumed people had meat with every meal, but we didn't when the war came. I think teenage years that you think of now just disappeared. I had too much responsibility to have a normal childhood.
Did your school become involved in the war effort, like collecting cans or anything?
I don't remember that at all.
Okay.
I went to Lamberton, 8th and 9th grade, I guess, and I don't remember anything like that. By 10th grade, my mother was very ill, and I was sent to boarding school.
So, with the soldiers, what was it like having them living with you?
Well, that was interesting because, there weren't motels and places where they could go. I mean, they just didn't exist. And there was just a call that anyone who could take in couples, would they offer, bedroom space, etc. Could they come live with you? And I think particularly because my mother was ill, my father said, hey, that's good, because I was there alone quite often. At 13 in that house, alone for a week before your father came home for the weekend wasn't real great. So he very quickly offered, I think we took in 2 couples at a time, and I think if the man came without the wife, I think he stayed at the Carlisle Barracks, but where the wife was involved, they were looking for homes. What was an experience was that these people were from all over the United States, and we right away pooled the food situation and everything else, and they only stayed 6 weeks, but in a sense they became part of our family. And I think what blew me away was to be introduced to all these, I guess today we would call them regional foods, which were, the world just didn't have those things. And I can remember one family from Texas, and of course we were very careful with meat, and we'd had some kind of a meal that had gravy with it. And I remember we're cleaning up afterwards, and she said, "Oh, save the gravy." And normally we threw out leftover gravy. And so she packed it carefully in a bowl, and she says, "We'll have gravy sandwiches tomorrow." And I'm thinking, huh? And the next day, she sliced the gravy like it was a meat, put a little mustard on 2 pieces of bread, and that was your sandwich. This, was not how I was used to eating. I had peanut butter and jelly or real meat, but we had some pretty spicy food from some of these people. And I can remember the people from down south wanted their greens, their kale and stuff like that, which we had never eaten just because it wasn't a common thing up here. From that standpoint, it was very interesting. Some of them had accents so thick, I had trouble understanding because, again, we were not exposed to, nobody traveled that much. You didn't have television, so you weren't hearing the southern drawl or the twang from Texas. So all of it was very interesting. We enjoyed these people. I think and particularly between the women. I talked to my sister. She was up visiting me this week about what she remembered. And she said she remembers that all day long in the summer, the women were there with me or with her if she was home. And we just had never had the experience as youngsters of associating with women who were maybe 30 years old and just spending like a whole day after day with them. And, that was, to us, quite interesting.
Okay, I guess you can answer what you and your family did for them. Did they be involved in cooking with you for the meals?
Yes, we kind of had. We were a family of Girl Scouts, and we had a caper chart. The minute they came, we said each family was responsible for food for this day, or this day, and if somebody cooked the dinner, then somebody else cleaned up. And I had my places. I was my family, so to speak, so there were times I had to cook the meal or clean up, etc. But we divided all the chores, and my father had insisted on that. He said, you are not the maid to these people, and they wouldn't have wanted us to be. After dinner, if my father was there, we were a family that sang a lot, and he played the mandolin very well, and we would just sit and sing songs that were familiar to all of us, she'll be coming over the mountain and that kind of stuff. But it kind of solidified all of us. I would say we had a kind of a bathroom schedule because suddenly there were a lot more people there aren't too many bathrooms in that house. But it worked out very well, and I can't say there was any couple that we found difficult. They were all different, but they were all very cooperative, and everyone was under a lot of stress, and that isn't a time. It's a time to be very tactful and giving to others.
The time these families stayed, did you get more rationing stamps, or did you have to work with what you had?
We worked with what we had, but they had theirs.
Oh.
I mean, that was, you handed over your ration stamps when you walked in the house. And there would be a purse for money, what we'd all put in maybe $50, I don't know how much, and then a purse of rationing stamps.
Okay.
And they gave us their rationing stamps for the 6 weeks period that they were with us. And we all worked, from that.
So 1 second. Okay. Were there things you and your family wanted to buy during the war but you couldn't because of the rationing and such?
Let me just say, I wasn't aware of anything.
Okay.
It was a much less of a consumer society than you girls are used to. I mean, I made my own clothes even at that age.
Wow.
I sewed a lot, but I'm not aware of being denied anything.
With your Victory Garden, did you guys can your food then, just to save?
I think we froze it. And we didn't have a freezer, but Lemoyne, there was one over here in Lemoyne, and my father came by it to work. And you walked in a big room, and you had like a vault or a locker where you kept your food. I mean, it was for the whole community.
Wow.
And I can remember preparing the things to freeze, and he brought them in when he went to work.
Wow. Did any of your family members participate in any war effort activities?
Except for my father, who built army camps as an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was still a civilian, but one summer he was building an army camp up at Greensboro, and I spent the summer up there with him. But he was, I guess, too old to be drafted because he was in World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no brothers, so.
Do you remember VE and VJ Day?
Yes.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the news that the war was over?
I was in New York City.
Wow.
And I, at that point, was in boarding school. My roommate was from New York City, and I'd just gone up after June, say, to visit with her. And I can't remember whether it was VE or VJ, which occurred in the summer, but the place was wild. And I can remember we came out of a restaurant, and the father said, "We will go directly home. You will not go out tonight." And so we very quickly got to their apartment, and we were not allowed out. The next morning, I was to take a train back to Carlisle, or Harrisburg, and I can remember he drove me to the station, and there was all kinds of junk all over the street, and a few people definitely still drunk and loitering or whatever. A very different scene than you would normally. New York was not bustling, everybody going to work. They were just totally celebrating.
How do you think the war changed your life at all?
Well, I think it definitely took my teenage years, my carefree years, in a sense, away from me. But in return, I think it made me a very responsible person who didn't expect much in the way of carefreeness. I definitely learned, I was paying the household bills at 14. At one point, and I can't tell you, well, it was either my 8th or 9th grade, probably before the soldiers came, my father realized that my mother could not take care of me, and I was taken into Carlisle, and he found a boarding house, which was all you had at those days. The old lady ran it, and he rented me a room in her boarding house, and I lived in a boarding house and got myself to school, took care of my meals, and then every weekend I had to take my bicycle out to 2 Mile House, pay the bills, check the house, do whatever was necessary. But I was not allowed to sleep there alone. And I had to then come back to the boarding house. And, I mean, that's lonely. I don't care how you slice it when you're new in town.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think I learned, that you do what you have to do and you don't bitch about it. After I had been with her several months, and I had to walk downtown to a place called some hamburger shop to get my meals. After I'd been with there several months, one of the girls in my class, Dorothy Strayer, would take me home for lunch because I could help her with her homework. And after maybe 3 months, I remember one Saturday, her father came marching in the boarding house and said, "Is she paid up to date?" And the woman said, "Oh, yes, oh, yes." And he said, "Well, here's a note from her father. She's coming to live with us." So I moved into a very nice house and lived with them for the rest of the year, or until, things got straightened out. I think those of us who lived through the war learned how to take care of ourselves. We learned that you can not survive. I mean, I didn't even feel it was a question of survival, but you don't have to have 3 square meals a day. You don't have to. What you want to do has no importance. It's what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't want to not live at home with a normal family, but there was no choice. At 16, I was driving, I had a car, and I took care of everything. I don't think it hurt me a bit. It was probably extremely good for me. And I think now, or as I've grown older, the thing that I've just been so thankful that we didn't lose anyone in the war that we knew. There were people, we knew it was so-and-so's son, but it's nobody we intimately knew, that no one was lost in the war that we knew. I certainly appreciate how horrible war is, and you do everything to avoid it. And I think I've really been so thankful that from the time the war was over until now, I have not been affected by a war, and our country has not been as severely affected by the Vietnam and the Korean War as we were by World War II. And I have felt that that's been very fortunate for everybody.
With the people that stayed at your house, did you ever keep in contact with them after they left?
No. Okay. It wasn't easy to keep in contact.
That's true.
Well, we didn't do long-distance phone calls unless somebody had died. I mean, now you call all over the world and you keep in contact. We didn't have time. They were saying goodbye to their husbands, and they were anxious to get back to their family, wherever that was. But we may have kept in contact for a year or so. And again, I was a 13-year-old child. You don't.
Okay. When the soldiers stayed at your house, where did they stay in the house?
We gave them each a bedroom. If you know that house at all, you probably don't, but there are 4 or 5 bedrooms on the second floor. There's a little apartment like over the kitchen, and we gave them each a bedroom or a section. And then, of course, the whole downstairs was open territory for everybody. And there was lots. There's a den, a huge living room, dining room, another breakfast room, and a huge kitchen, and porches and things. So, we were just kind of all over the place. They weren't confined to a bedroom, but they just all had a room where they slept. And I think we took care of sheets and everything. I mean, they came with a suitcase.